Hey, Watson here, and we're going to look today at how to use the Lasso tool. We have looked at many things so far that are mostly about modifying the image in the sense of how it looks, and things like the color replacement tool, the brush, the layer mask, the clone stamp tool, the healing brush, those sorts of things, which are basic modifications to the image. But now we're going to look at the Lasso tool. With the Lasso tool, we're able to select an area of our image and either make changes to it on its own or be able to actually duplicate and move things around our image. But to do that, there are a couple things you need to know about the Lasso tool possibilities. First, when we've discussed using a tool, remember, whenever you have a tool selected, if there's a small arrow in the lower right, that means there's more than one tool associated with that button. I like to call them a tool drawer. So when you click and hold on it, the drawer opens and you can see the possibilities. The Lasso tool, the Polygon Lasso tool, and the Magnetic Lasso tool. All of these tools work with different ways of drawing around something and selecting it. So for our purposes today, we're going to start with the Lasso tool, and the Lasso tool works like this. It's got a little lasso picture. Wherever you see that black arrow in the just to the upper left of the lasso is where you'll actually draw your selection line. So here we are going to draw around her face and head and create a selection. To do that with the Lasso tool, it's just drawing, just like you would with a pen or with a stylus on the iPad. Wherever you click and hold, and then wherever you pull around, you will select whatever is going around that. And you can see me drawing the line there. And when I come back to the beginning, I undo, I remove the left click, and it makes that selection. And these dashed lines, you can see they're kind of marching around there. They actually call those the marching ants. So wherever you have the marching ants, you actually have a selection. And you can see that my cursor changes. When it's outside the box, it's the Lasso tool. When it's inside the box, it's this white arrow and a selection box. And what that means is when I'm on the selection box, I can right-click and I get a whole list of options. For our purposes at this point, the Lasso tool we'll use very selectively because when you want to do a large swath of selecting something, the Lasso tool, you just draw around it. There are a couple drawbacks. One of the drawbacks is when you are selecting something and if you accidentally let go of the mouse, it just draws and goes back to the very beginning of where you started, and you may not get your whole selection. So the other tools are often easier to use. For our purposes here, the Polygon Lasso tool is just that. It creates polygons or multi-sided objects, meaning that when you click once, it sets a lock point, and wherever you go to next, it draws a straight line. So if I go down here, I'm drawing straight lines around her face. Now, I could draw a whole bunch of them to try and get something that looks similar to a corner, but you can never draw a circle with the Polygon tool because it's always drawing flat sides. So, for a round part, it may not work very well. And it might work better with something like the stop sign. So, let's undo that. And to undo a lasso in progress, if you get stuck somewhere, just hit escape and it removes it. So if we go to our flat sides, click on one end, draw a straight line to the other end of the sign, draw another straight line to our sign, and we are going to do the octagonal shape of our stop sign. Now, to close off the selection, meaning to get us out of it, we have a couple options. One is we can double click and it will automatically go to the point at which we started. So if I'm down here, I made a lock point, I double click, and then it gives me the marching ants. The other way, the other method is when we come down here, we're going to redo our selection real quick. Clickety click, clockety clock. The mouse ran around the clock. Is when we come back to our start point, the cursor will change. You'll get a little circle. If you can see that there. Go up here and do here. You'll get a little circle that shows up next to the Lasso tool. When you have that little circle, that means you'll complete the selection. So if I just single click, now I've completed my selection. And I have the marching ants around my sign. So that would be a way to go if we were going to pull out the sign. But we're going to pull out the head, right? So To do that, we are going to undo our selection, Control Z again, and we're going to choose the magnetic lasso tool. We're going to zoom in on her face here a little bit so we can see a little bit more. Remember to use the space bar with the hand to move around our image a little quicker. With the magnetic lasso tool, what the magnetic lasso tool does is looks at the difference between light and dark areas and allows us to draw around that and actually stick or be magnetic to the edges of what we want to select. Now, before we actually get into the select, you know notice the cursor is different. And the cursor is different right now, and it doesn't look like a lasso because if we were to try and do the magnetic lasso tool at this point, it's not going to work very well because we are not on a layer that has any image on it. So make sure you're on your background layer. Click next to what you want to start selecting and draw around it. As you can see, it's picking pretty close to what we want to pick, but it's still a little bit outside the edge. We'll show you how to fix that in a minute. We're going to go down here, and you can see that the tool is looking at the light and dark areas and making a selection based on that. However, if we decide it didn't quite get what we wanted, we could escape and get rid of that, but there is an easier method. If we click here and go along her face, see it kind of sticks out there along the hair. We didn't want that. So if we backspace, that undoes what we did, and if we click, we can make lock points. Every time we click, it makes a lock point, so we can get it to select exactly what we want. We're going to pull right along her cheek there. See, it's doing pretty good along that way. We're going to go right down over here, come right down on her chin. We're going to go around the sign, and we're going to come back along her hair. Okay, I'm going to go up some of these spots. Also, when we're doing a selection, you may run into this problem when you're zoomed in enough to see your selection, is you'll get to the edge of what you're trying to select. So there's two things you can do. One, you can just kind of drag it up, but as you do that, it's easy to get off your track. So instead of just pulling up, we backspace, okay, we start working around here. If you need to come around that edge, press the space bar and you've got the hand, and you notice my selection stops so I can move on to the next part. Come back to where you were, and I'll keep drawing around the hat. You know, so there's a good difference between the light and dark there. So it's drawing around the hat pretty well, although I don't like that little bump. So I can come back here and I can make lock points myself to try and smooth out the hat a little bit. As we come back here, again, coming down, making our hat. Now, there's two ways we can close this off. One is if we double click and it'll go straight back, or if we follow her cheek, turns into our little circle, click. Now we have our selection of her head. We have the marching ants. We're ready to move the head. And the same, from this point forward, it applies to whether you're using the standard lasso tool or the polygon lasso tool or the magnetic lasso tool. When you're in the middle of the selection, you have a white arrow and you have the white box. That means when we right click, we have some options for some things that we want to do. Always as well, once you have your selection, make sure you're on the same layer where you're selecting something. So like for instance, our adjustment layers don't have any content. Make sure you're on your background layer. Right click, and there's three that we're going to be most concerned with. Refine edge, layer via copy, and layer via cut. First is refine edge. You'll notice, zoomed in here on this picture, that our edge is actually pretty soft. When we look around her eyes and around her nose and farther down around the sign, it's not a really sharp image. With the selection tool, if we leave it as it is, we'll end up with this really hard edge, and we don't want that. We want it to match the picture that we're in. So when we right click and go to refine edge, or from the top of our window choose refine edge, we'll click on that and we have some options. The view mode lets us choose how we want to look at it, either the marching ants, an overlay, which shows you the sharpness of the cutout. The cutout is the standard color, and in red is everything that's left behind. You can see it on black. If you need to see where some edges are around the white, you can see that around the sign and around her hair, so we can get rid of those. You can see it on white if you've got a dark background. You can see just black and white, so you can see what the cutout looks like without an image on it. You can see what it looks like if it fits on a layer, or it shows everything together. for our purposes, the overlay I think is going to work pretty well. So to make some changes, there's a couple things that we want to do. Most of the time, the basic changes you're going to use are smooth, feather, and shift edge. If we choose smooth, you'll notice that the edge of our cutout starts to smooth out a little bit, and it doesn't take very much. Often the sense is to drag it over to the end and see what happens, but then we get a little too much. So just small adjustments seem to work pretty well. Come back here, we're going to smooth the edge a little bit, then we're going to feather it to make it a little soft so it matches the rest of our image. We do that, and then we can shift our edge. You can see we've started to take a little bit more of the hair than we want. So if we shift the edge to the plus side, it starts to pull that out a little bit. Okay, and then we've got our cutout. If we click OK, now we can see our selection again, and we go back to the middle, and then there's two options that we have for layering. We can layer via cut or layer via copy. If we layer via cut, which most people tend to think is the right one, the problem is when we go to move our piece, instead of having something behind it, now we got a big hole in our image. We don't want to do that. So instead of layer via cut, we want to layer via copy. So if we go back to our lasso tool, make sure you're on your lasso tool, right click and go to layer via copy. Now you can see we've made a layer, and if we turn off the background, we can see our cutout. We'll see it's nice and soft. Works pretty good there. Turn our background back on, and if we go to the move tool, now we have created a monster, a second head. Okay. Now with this, we can do a couple different things. One, we can take this head and move it to a different picture. If we have both pictures open, we can drag the layer over to the new picture, and we'll have moved her head from this picture over to our new one. And you can apply that to any kind of piece. It doesn't have to be a person's head. It could also be the stop sign or whatever you want to move. The other thing we can do is we can start rearranging this and put it someplace we want by either moving it if we have the move tool selected, or we can change its size and rotation and even flip it left or right. So to do that, make sure you're on the move tool, choose show transform controls from the top of the window, and you've got these bounding boxes. Now we have to be careful how we use those. If we want to rotate, if we go outside our box and we have these rotational arrows, we can grab the corners and we can turn it one way or the other, or all the way around. Okay. Now if we want to get that rotated and then I want to move it, let's get it down there along the sign so it looks like she has, you know, a second head poking out there. Okay. Now the transform tool has turned this to a solid line. You have to be careful when that happens. At this point, because I've made some transformations and I haven't accepted them yet, I'm just kind of playing with it, I can't do anything else. So make sure if you're happy with those changes, hit enter, and then it accepts those changes. Now we can also change the size if we grab the bounding boxes. One of the problems though is if we grab the sides, look what happens to the head. We get all squishy one way or the other. Okay? Which for playing around sometimes can work, but most of the time we want to keep our proportions correct. So if you make a change and you're not happy with it, hit escape instead of enter. And before you grab the corners, press and hold the shift key, and then when you grab the corners, the proportions of the person or whatever you're putting down or changing size stay the same. Same thing whether you're making it bigger or making it smaller. So we're going to give her a smaller one here. Move it around a little bit and hit enter to select it. Now she has a special friend. Now another thing we can do is, because we are, got to remember, don't touch the screen, because we are on a layer with the head, we can take that now and we can make a duplicate of it. We can make another one really easy. We don't have to select anything because we've already got it selected. If we right click on the appropriate layer, choose duplicate layer, and we're going to say if I can type right, person head 2. Okay, create the new layer. Now it duplicated the layer, so it's going to be in the same spot. But if we have our move tool selected, now we have another one and we can rotate it. Okay, got the same size, and now she's triplets. all using the same head. Pretty entertaining, huh? Now, one of the other things we can do is we can also turn this and do some flipping. So if we want to make a face turn the opposite direction or an object turn the opposite direction, go to your Edit drop-down menu, choose Transform, and flip horizontal. Now, she flipped that way, so I can take it and rotate it here, and very entertaining look. Again, make sure you accept the transformation to be able to do something else when it goes back to the light lines. And there you go. That's the basics of using the lasso tool. If you have any questions, we'll have another look into using the lasso tool for our next assignment. Thank you.